The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
Both of Charles McNair's novels move beyond realism into an imagined world that seems familiar, then isn't. Land of Goshen is set in the near future when the religious fervor in America has escalated into outright civil war, the conventionally religious against the radical fundamentalists. His new novel, Pickett's Charge, tells the story of the last surviving Civil War veteran, Threadgill Pickett, who at the age of 114 sets out from Mobile on a wonderfully absurdist journey to Maine to kill the last surviving Union soldier. I spoke with Charles McNair at the studios of Alabama Public Television in Montgomery, Alabama. Charles, it's nice to see you again.
Happy to be seen.
You and I have been acquainted since you were an undergraduate student at Alabama. When did you graduate?
Well, I was a knuckle dragger back then. I graduated never from the University of Alabama.
I didn't know that.
I was in school from 72 to 79, and when I left Tuscaloosa, I was still a sophomore, and that is the truth. I was on the 12-year undergrad plan. I studied a semester and refused to take money from home, so I would get out and work and make enough until I could come back to school. And then at some point, I stopped deciding to take any of the classes that I didn't like, and I only took the writing classes. I took Barry's class 3 or 4 times. I didn't get credit after once. That's Barry Hanna, who was one of the great fiction teachers there and a great fiction writer. But it's a sordid undergrad career.
Did you go on to school somewhere else?
I got married in 1979, and on my honeymoon went to Verona, Italy. I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks, and a week into the trip, a man walked up in a bar in Verona, tall, handsome Italian named Coppola, and this was the exact conversation. He said, "Are you an American?" Yes, I'm an American. It must have been the blue windbreaker that I was wearing. He said, "Do you play baseball?" And I said, "Yeah." I hadn't picked up a glove or ball in 7 years. I was 25 then. And without any further conversation, he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He said, "Charles, I'm an umpire in the Italian baseball leagues, and if you will sign up and play with the local Italian team and help coach it, I will give you and your wife jobs, and I'll give you a free place to live." And so my 2-week honeymoon in Verona turned into a 9-month European stay.
Huh.
I have put on every resume that I ever created, third baseman, Verona Arsenal. And it has gotten me more conversation in job interviews and other places than anything I've ever
I had
included.
no idea.
Funny how the road goes.
Well, I remember the days that you and Mark Childress would come and either watch or participate in the English department's softball team.
Well, we
had a good team.
You had a very good team, and it was a pugnacious team. I played with the men's honors dorm, Mallet Hall, and we would play on Sunday afternoons on Barnwell Field back behind the dorm where I lived, which, by the way, is no more.
No.
Neither is my house on 10th Street where I lived a couple of years. It seems like every place I ever lived, they bring in the blade. And
Tuscaloosa is much changed. There's been a lot of places torn down and a lot of student condos and what have you built up.
I will tell you, though, in 1974, on April the 24th, I dropped out of school and left Alabama. I was 20 years old. I realized that I had never been out of the states of Alabama, Mississippi, or Georgia. And I'm from Dothan, which is 14 miles from Florida and 18 miles from Georgia. That's a tiny world. So one day at Alabama, I decided in 1 week, I got drunk, stoned, and laid for the first time, dropped out of school, and hitchhiked to El Paso, Texas. And it was sort of my declaration of independence. And from then on, I became my own Charles, the Charles that I'm still true to. Every 10 years, my co-conspirators in this have met again in Tuscaloosa, 424-84, 424-94, 04, and we've got 14 here upon us. We weren't able to meet on 424-14, but we're meeting in May. So this will be the 40th anniversary. Every 4 decades, all of us have assembled who took part in this moment. And, I look forward to seeing the guys.
You studied with Barry Hannah, as you say, more than once, so to speak.
If you call it that.
Barry Hannah was a singular writer and a singular teacher, and I have, over the many years, talked to a number of writers who, Bob Inman and any number of people who were his students. I always ask, people are always essentially unable to say, what was the alchemy? What is the connect? How did he do it? He was certainly unorganized. He was certainly chaotic, but a great number of people from his classes became writers.
I think that when I heard Barry was going to be teaching, he was the first person. Remember, I come from Dothan. I come from a place where even today, I believe that I heard that the illiteracy rate among adults is something close to 25%. Mm-hmm. Can read a stop sign, that's about it. So when you grow up and you want to be a writer, there aren't writers there. You don't know what that means. My dad was mystified by the concept. What is a writer? What do they do? How do they make a living? He never understood the pursuit that I wanted. So when I got to Alabama, here was the hot young colt of American literature, publishing in Esquire every single month, and the first writer that I ever laid eyes on that made a living doing this thing.
He was a professional.
That I dreamed about.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the case for a lot of people who came from the rural parts of Alabama and laid eyes on the man for the first time. He did write that story titled Constant Pain in Tuscaloosa.
Very difficult story.
And I think that was really his credo while he was at the university. Barry he may have been a good literature teacher, but I'm going to speak heresy here and say he was not a good writing teacher for me.
No, I think, whatever it was that he did, people are unable to articulate it. It is, I think that you've come as close as I've heard, which is to say that you looked at him and you said, now it is possible to be a writer.
Exactly.
Right.
There is a North Star.
Yep.
The problem with Barry and I was Barry didn't suffer a fool, and I was a fool then. In those years, I was jejune, I was very immature, I was very conflicted about what I living up to a standard that home wanted me to meet and living up to a standard that I felt pulled me in a different way.
Well, something moved you to put in the effort to write Land of Goshen. I remember when the book was new. In fact, I know I reviewed it when it was new.
You did, thank you.
And I remember you promoted it relentlessly. I can remember you speaking on a couple of different occasions, talking about how you had driven 97,000 miles. I made that up. 18,000
miles, and I didn't make that up.
to promote the book.
Absolutely.
The book is futuristic. Although now I suspect we are practically living in what would have been the future of Land of Goshen.
It's strange. The book seems to come more and more true every year.
It's about it's about a time in America, let's call it the future still, or we hope not, but anyway, I don't think we've quite got there yet, in which the religious conflicts have so come to the surface that it creates a kind of second civil war.
Exactly.
On religious terms,
Exactly.
the fundamentalists against the rest.
Yes.
What moved you to write about a religious civil war? Did you see things in the culture around you that sparked this?
I had written a story of a young man who puts on a costume and goes out as sort of a one-man terrorist.
Yeah.
To fight a private battle against forces that he didn't understand but tried to deal with in his own very offbeat way. I never had a motivation for that until in 1984 at the Republican National Convention, I watched Pat Robertson on the biggest screen humankind had ever made until then, it looked like. And he gave this speech that basically said that if you don't think the way I do, and if you don't believe the way I do, then there's no place for you in my world. And the wheels began to turn, and something in me said, what if he really does become the president? What happens? Are we in a religious orthodoxy now that sort of precludes other points of view? And what would that lead to, or could that lead to? Are people just going to take it lying down? And so that was really the idea for the backdrop of this book.
Right.
The real book, though, is about a boy and a girl who live wild in the woods like Adam and Eve. And they fall in love, and what happens when a very different world comes into theirs.
Well, as you read along, and I reread it for fun because I knew we'd be talking, and it's interesting that the forces, the organized governmental forces, are the fundamentalists. The rebels are also Christians, also people of faith, or not, but perfectly within the tent, but not quite there.
They're just not orthodox
enough.
Right. It's there is an epigraph in this book from Thoreau, or maybe John Muir, I forget now, it's been a long time. But that is, in wildness is the preservation of the world. And so, and there's another from Jeremiah, maybe, woe unto those who call good evil and call evil good. And that to me is the crux, those two ideas are the crux here, is that there is perhaps a primitive, naive faith in many people that is more real than what comes from the cookbook that's pulled down off the shelf and opened up on Sundays, and closed then, and people go out and behave in all kinds of ways. And this whole book is, if you read it as sort of a study of faith, that's the key. It's not a political book. It's not a science fiction book. It's a study of what is true faith. And not to get too heavy with it all, but
it's been a while, and your friends all ask one another, and I'm sure to the point of exasperation have asked you, what about a second book, McNair? And now there is one. Pickett's Charge is out.
Thank goodness.
Joe Taylor at Livingston has put it out.
Yes.
It's making its way in the world, and it is, again, a Civil War book in a sense. You have posited that there is the oldest living Confederate veteran, and he lives outside in a nursing home outside Mobile.
Indeed.
And he is going to go to Maine and kill the oldest living Union veteran.
That's the conceit.
That's the story.
Think of the old bumper sticker that you saw in the 1960s, the old Confederate soldier and raising his flag and yelling, "Forget hell."
Right.
That's this guy.
He is the opening chapters, the early chapters that take place during the Civil War. He is grievously wounded.
Yeah.
He has an unhealable wound on his head.
I'm glad you said it that way, because, of course, Threadgill Pickett, the old man, is emblematic of what happened to the South in the Civil War. There was an unhealable wound inflicted. And the South, people talk about how Reconstruction lasted 20 years in the South. Reconstruction was going on when I was born in 1954, where I came from. People still smell powder in the air in many parts of the South. And so why is the central question of this book. At what point does a culture forgive and forget and let go of grudge? And I mean, this is a central question not only in the South, but of the planet we live on. I heard somebody made light the other day. They said, hey, have you heard of Irish amnesia? I said, no, what's that? And they said, well, you forget everything but your grudges. So ask the Northern and the Southern Irish about vengeance. Ask the Palestinians and the Jews about vengeance. Ask the tribes in Africa and anywhere you go, there are cultures that are set against one another because of long memory and because of terrible things. Let's face it. The question is, 100 years here, the South woke up in the 60s. The Civil Rights Movement forced a coming to terms with who we were and how we were. We're still going through that terrible coming to grips with ourselves and what is right, what is wrong in the way you treat people.
Forget hell is not a useful concept. In the course of the book, your Threadgill Pickett finds himself on a little island in Mobile Bay, at which time there is a hurricane. Everything is blown off the island. Mm-hmm. And I was reading along and I thought, this is fascinating. What's happening now is evolution. Mm-hmm. It's the history of the planet all over again. Yeah. Within, of course, but you speed it up at 1,000,000 times normal speed. Is that, I mean, you're a devotee of Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Yes.
Is that kind of magical realism in that scene in particular something that you would link back to something like 100 Years of Solitude?
100 Years of Solitude by the great late writer who has just passed away is a central book in my development as a writer. So is the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. And I am of the 60s, and Ray Bradbury. And by the way, I got a fan letter from Ray Bradbury for Land of Goshen after that. You talk about something that'll make your day. Yeah. But those books that look at the world through, they depart from the truth in order to make the truth more profound. It's like a tall tale. What are the stories we remember in our lives? Aesop's fables. Do we really think a fox sat and looked up at the grapes and mouthed the words, well, they were probably sour anyway? It's a distortion of reality to tell a deeper truth. Jesus told stories. Were they little white lies? Do we believe that, for instance, there really was a prodigal son? Do we believe that there was a good Samaritan? Or were these simply stories that Jesus made up in order to tell a truth? This is the same thing that these writers did, Kesey and Marquez, only they took it to greater lengths. Yeah. And to me, that's so attractive. And the idea of unleashing your imagination and from the tethers of what is normal and mundane, and that you can read anywhere, anytime. That's not what appeals to me as a writer. I am going for the myth. I am going for the parable myself, and that's what Threadgill is. He is it's an allegory.
Well, he's kind of every man, isn't he?
He is the South on a journey from grievous injury to maybe redemption. And all he has to go through to reach that is, happens in the 1960s, and, a perfect landscape. He's also Don Quixote. He's this really crazy old man with these outdated, foggy notions of honor and valor, and he's set loose in a world that he has no clue how to deal with or how to accept.
Well, he is burdened at the beginning with the the lust for revenge, and he's going to have it. But he ends up in your mythological transformations. It moves from myth to myth as the novel moves along. Yeah. But the myth that you close with is the peaceable kingdom. It's the Garden of Eden.
Absolutely.
And you have located the peaceable kingdom, the Garden of Eden, on Sand Mountain, which is not where most Alabamians would put it.
Well, and on a chicken farm on Sand Mountain. And on a chicken farm on Sand Mountain the morning after it's been hit by a tornado. So there are tens of thousands of chickens strewn all about the landscape. And there are black families and white families out together, gathering up the windfall and creating the world's biggest barbecue.
It is the biggest chicken barbecue in the universe.
In the universe ever in the history of humankind. Thousands, tens of thousands of chickens. And Threadgill stumbles into this and he sort of has a glimpse of what a world might be where people really were reconciled to one another.
But the racial harmony in that long closing section, it's very pleasing. It's very optimistic. They've had the tornado and they have the chickens. But even before the tornado and the chickens, those people there were getting along. They had achieved something on that little, what don't I call it, a different island. You have the island in the Gulf of Mobile Bay. Then you had this other little island of harmony on Sand Mountain. Mm-hmm. Is that a kind of a projection of yours about the peaceable kingdom we would like to see?
Well, if you'll remember too, I mean, without giving away too much of what happens in the book, there's a snake in the garden in the end. Something has happened to one of the members of the large black family that has gathered to help the white family pick up after the tornado and have this enormous, giant, heavenly picnic. It's the heavenly kingdom, right? That's what it is. And Threadgill has a glimpse into it, but something has happened in a chapter or two before that undercuts really what may ensue in that place. And I can't talk too much about it without spoiling the end of the book.
One rarely sees that kind of hope. But it was refreshing in its own way.
I have always been the most sunny side up guy. The glass has always been 3/4 full with me. I think I got this from my mom, who is by nature the most cheerful person and most imaginative person. She has watched this show, by the way, for years, and I know she keeps wondering if I'm ever going to be on here. So she'll call me every time Mark Childress shows up on here. Your friend Mark's on. And I say, yeah, thanks, Mom. I'm going to be on there one day, I promise. She also, I got that from my mom, and from my dad I got the discipline to be able to sit down and write and write and write when you never know if it's really going to amount to something. That first book took 12 years to write, 12 years of me being a squid, living in the dark, squirting ink, and finally it came to something. The second book, 19 years between. I was a dad first in all those years.
Bonnie Dream,
my beautiful child.
Who must be now a grown woman, surely.
She's 19. She's at Bard College. She made the highest SAT score of any child I ever knew. Just shot the lights out with that, and I'm very proud of her.
Great. Well, 12 years, 19 years.
We're going to do better.
In an act of cruelty, an act of sadism, I will ask you, what next? Because I don't think you can afford another 19 years.
I don't have that many more 19 years in me, do I?
So what are you doing?
I have 300 pages written now of a new book underway, and I'm not going to talk too much about it. It's called The Epicureans, working title. It's the story of a billionaire dining club that gathers on the winter solstice every year to have a very unusual meal.
And is it contemporary? Is it set in more or less the present?
Set in the present. Still set in Alabama.
Oh.
All my books are here. I'm writing the Alabamiad. I'm going to box them all one day and call it the Alabamiad. Here, buy them.
And you're writing full time these days?
I write for a steady paycheck for different businesses and organizations. I have Fortune 50 companies that I serve, and then I'm writing fiction at night, like I always have. I'm a late night writer.
Well, I hope, and I actually, from what you say, if you have 300 pages, I think there's room for confidence here.
Yeah.
It won't be so long till the next one, because people have certainly enjoyed your first two.
Thank you, Don.
Charles, it's good to see you.
My pleasure.
Congratulations.
And thanks for your good service to all of us writers. You are a guy who cares about books and writers, and I can tell you now, look you in the eye and say thanks.
Thank you.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800-463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.